A very good morning. You're watching World News, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Wednesday marks day 2 of the NATO foreign ministers' meeting in Brussels. Poland's top diplomat, Radosław Sikorski, is in attendance. The agenda for the meeting includes support for Ukraine and ways to ensure support for Kyiv as it continues to defend itself against Russian aggression. The assembled ministers will also discuss cooperation with NATO's southern partners in North Africa and the Middle East, and the commitment to forge a path towards peace in the region. In addition, they will lay the groundwork for the NATO summit in The Hague in mid-2025. The Pact Secretary General, Mark Rutte, will speak to journalists and give some more details on the agenda before the meeting starts.
LGBTQI community in the country, and so many other things that have been done before they actually named what it is, what it is they're trying to do. They're trying to get Georgia out of the path to
And we are now
EU.
watching Lithuania's foreign minister giving a short briefing to the press during day 2 of the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels.
It was a very clear message to Georgian people, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. Now, when it comes to the sanctions,
At the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels on Tuesday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stressed the importance of further support for Ukraine despite Chinese and Russian efforts to destabilize the North Atlantic Alliance.
Tomorrow, ministers will address Russia's hostile actions in NATO countries. Over the past years, Russia and also China have tried to destabilize our nations with acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, and energy blackmail to intimidate us. None of these actions will deter us from supporting Ukraine or making our own defenses stronger. NATO allies will continue to stand together to face these threats through a range of measures, including greater intelligence sharing and better protection of our critical infrastructure. Let me be very firm on this, and here I will quote Zelensky end of February 2022, when some countries offered him a plane to bring him into safety in Poland, and he said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." I would now argue that Ukraine doesn't need more ideas on what a peace process could look like, and you and I can sit together and drink a cup of coffee, and we can think of many ways how to deal with a peace process whenever that starts. But I would argue, let's not have all these discussions step by step on what a peace process might look like. Make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to get to a position of strength when those peace talks start, when the Ukrainian government has decided they are ready to do so.
Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said during the NATO meeting in Brussels that any security guarantees for Ukraine should be robust and consequential. She added that any peace deal between Kyiv and Russia must be just and lasting.
It must not be a freezing of a conflict that only leads to further armaments and further attacks on Ukraine or other European countries. And that's why it's essential that we bring different elements together. But let me emphasize, Ukraine alone decides on bringing these elements together, because it is their country, their sovereign country. Once again, the one who has been standing in the way of peace for over 1,000 days is the Russian president, who started this war of aggression in violation of international law for no good reason.
And now we move to Georgia. Citizens gathered in the capital for the 6th night in a row on Tuesday, continuing to protest against the government's decision to postpone EU accession talks. TVP World correspondent Don Arlith has more on the situation in Tbilisi.
Day 6 and the protests here in the capital of Georgia continue. Now tonight, significantly more people here on the streets. Maybe not quite as violent in terms of fireworks, but we've been told that people have come from cities from around the country and are out here showing their support for this movement after last night's brutal crackdown. Now, last night the police shut this area down much earlier than in the previous protests. They also used violence against protesters, rubber bullets, and tear gas. We were tear gassed a few times last night, just like everybody else here on the streets. As the night went on, we actually witnessed quite a horrific incident with a A young man who appears to have taken a brutal shot to the head and perhaps even a shot to the body. It's been reported in local news today that a 22-year-old man was hit in the head with a tear gas canister, rendering him brain dead, and he is now in the ICU in critical condition. Now, whether this is the same individual that we saw last night, we're unable to confirm as of today, but we're still waiting to see what the situation is with this young man, as he could become the first victim of these protests. Now, a lot of people have been comparing this to what happened in Ukraine, the Maidan, of course. Still, we haven't seen quite the brutality that we saw in Ukraine, but with the numbers out tonight, this indicates that Georgians are not giving up at this point. They're going to continue these protests. And of course, the Prime Minister claiming earlier today that the attempt at the Maidan movement was thwarted by police here in the capital. We're just going to have to wait and see how this night goes on to see if it is more brutal than the night before. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
As the protests in Tbilisi continue to escalate, the Prime Minister of Georgia has accused the opposition of orchestrating a revolution. In its short history of independence, Georgia has seen contested elections, revolutions, and even wars. And Russia has been a looming presence in the country of some 4 million residents. Ovidiusz Nicieja has this report.
Barricades on the streets, gas masks, and lasers. That's how protesters in Tbilisi showed their disapproval to what they see as their country drifting away from the EU and closer to Russia.
They have a history of knowing what happens when you let Russia have its word in Georgia, so they're not ready to accept that.
Until 1991, Georgia, a country in the Caucasus, was a Soviet republic. Since then, the divorce from Russia has been a tough one. Independent Georgia has faced regional conflicts, which in 2008 escalated into a war against Russia. The Russian invasion led to hundreds of deaths and the displacement of hundreds of thousands.
Georgia has experienced firsthand what actually Ukraine has been experiencing over the past 3 years, because of the war of 2008.
Even now, Russian soldiers occupy some 20% of Georgia's territory. So far, though, experts say that a new Russian invasion is rather unlikely.
Russia simply does not have enough resources to intervene in Georgia.
But there were revolutions before in Georgia. In 2003, the so-called Rose Revolution ousted President Eduard Shevardnadze, who was the Soviet Union's last foreign minister. The revolution took place following a disputed parliamentary election.
Even if you take the Rose Revolution, there was always a leader, there was always a face that you could pinpoint to say that, okay, this is the person.
This leader was Mikhail Saakashvili, later Prime Minister and President of Georgia. It was Saakashvili who led Georgia during the Russian invasion in 2008. Now the former president is in prison. The current protests have no clear leader. Many participants say that it's a grassroots movement. The Georgian government, however, disagrees.
These attempts are funded from abroad, and this funding is not transparent. This is why certain actors were against the law on transparency. They wanted a revolution to be organized in a non-transparent way. I remind everyone that there will be no revolution in Georgia.
The opposition claims that special forces are involved in suppressing the protest.
And then when they arrest these people, they are beaten. All 80% of them are beaten and have injuries to the face and to the head, which shows that it's very systematic and very well directed.
More uncertainty is to come in Georgia. This month, the contested parliament will elect a new president of the republic. The current president, however, says that she will not accept that vote, as she believes the parliament is illegal.
The South Korean president has agreed to lift the martial law he had declared just a few hours ago. This comes after the country's lawmakers voted to block the president's move. Let's take a closer look at what exactly happened in Seoul.
Late at night, the South Korean president made a televised address.
I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces.
But the president's reasoning was immediately questioned.
We need to remember that President Yoon Suk Yeol approval ratings are the lowest in the history of Korea.
South Korean opposition leader called the martial law declaration illegal, vowing to seize this controversial opportunity.
I and opposition party members will protect democracy, the future of this country, the safety, life and property of the people.
And he is a man of his words. Korean lawmakers mobilized and reached the parliament in the middle of the night, supported by the South Korean public, to vote against the implementation of the previously imposed martial law. In the early hours of Wednesday, South Korean soldiers were seen packing up the riot gears and walking away from the barricaded parliament building. But this might not be the end of this story yet, as there are reports coming from a US news outlet, Newswire, that South Korean armed forces were attempting to arrest the South Korean opposition leader after the late-night vote.
In a late-night address, Yoon Suk Yeol said he introduced the measures to save the country from what he called anti-state forces. The move prompted major protests from the public and his own party, as the country has a lengthy history of being governed by dictatorship.
As of 11 o'clock last night, I declared emergency martial law with the intention of saving the country from anti-state forces that want to paralyze the essential functions of the state and collapse liberal democracy and the constitutional order. We withdrew the military that had been tasked with enforcing martial law hours ago because the National Assembly demanded that the martial law be lifted. The cabinet will immediately accept the demands of the National Assembly and lift martial law.
South Korea's opposition lawmakers now argue that President Yoon's continued stay in office poses a high risk of military conflict with neighboring North Korea. The leader of the Democratic Party of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, warns that the president could soon make another attempt at imposing martial law.
They will try to impose martial law again by fixing what went wrong the first time around. When the time comes, we, the citizens, along with the Democratic Party of Korea and our lawmakers, will step forward and fight to ensure victory. The moment they realize that martial law enforced with military power is ineffective, I think they will resort to initiating a localized conflict. The risk of provoking North Korea and eventually leading to military conflict is significantly high. Citizens, we need your vigilance and solidarity.
The South Korean president's declaration of martial law has raised alarm not only abroad but also inside the country. While he cited North Korea as the reason for his move, Yoon's motives are likely rooted in domestic politics. Radio Poland Asia correspondent Tomasz Sajewicz told TVP World.
His rates of support is lower than 20%. And last night he decided that quoting the threat, imminent threat from North Korea, and quoting that opposition parties are blocking work of the government, he declared the martial law. What we saw next is that exactly the military tried to enter the building of the parliament. It was unsuccessful. Then the 190 members of the parliament out of 300 voted against martial law. At the moment, what we are observing now, it's exactly 4 a.m. In South Korea, in Seoul, 3 a.m. in Singapore. The turmoil is still extended, and absolutely, I would say all my friends, all South Koreans are in deep shock. Not only the members of the opposition parties, they're not members of the democratic society, but also its own members of the president's party, Yoon Suk Yeol.
And so this is all the latest news for now, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World, as we'll be back in just a moment.